She was introduced as the farm manager, just an employee, someone who kept the operations running while the cameras rolled and the Roloff family played out their lives for America to watch. That was the official story. That was what we were supposed to believe. But here is the thing about official stories. They almost never survive contact with a timeline. Because when you line up the dates, when you actually sit down and map out what happened and when, a very different picture begins to take shape. Not the one Matt Roloff told on camera. Not the one the show presented as the clean, complicated but honest arc of a marriage ending. A different picture. One where the farm manager was already in the frame before the divorce was ever finalized. One where the separation announcement and the social media appearances and the public debut of a new relationship form a sequence that raises questions nobody on that show ever answered directly. This is the story of Caryn Chandler, where she came from, how she got here, and why she became the most talked about person in a show she was never supposed to headline. If this kind of deep dive is what you come here for, hit like, subscribe to LPBW Update, and turn on notifications, because this series does not stop at the surface. We are just getting started. Let us go back to the beginning. Not the beginning of the show. The show started in 2006, and most of you know that history. The beginning of Caryn Chandler as a figure in this story, because she did not appear out of nowhere. She was not a stranger Matt met after his marriage ended. Caryn Chandler worked at Roloff Farms as the operations manager. She was there, on the property, in the professional orbit of the Roloff family, for years before she ever appeared on anyone's radar as anything other than an employee. That matters. That context matters enormously, because the framing that was offered publicly, the idea that Matt moved on after the marriage ended, requires you to ignore the fact that the person he moved on with was already embedded in his daily professional life while the marriage was still technically intact. Now, let us be precise here, because precision is everything in a story like this. We are not inside that marriage. We do not have access to private conversations or text messages or what was actually said between Matt and Amy behind closed doors. What we have is what was documented, what was filmed, what was posted publicly on social media, and what the timeline, when you actually build it out carefully, reveals on its own. Matt and Amy Roloff announced their separation in 2015. That announcement came after years of what viewers had watched as a marriage under visible strain. Financial disagreements, communication breakdowns, the kind of distance that accumulates in a relationship until it becomes a wall neither person can climb over. The separation was framed, both by the couple and by the show, as a mutual and honest unraveling. Two people who had built a life together, raised 4 children together, constructed a public identity together, deciding that life was better lived apart. But here is where the timeline gets complicated, because Caryn Chandler did not appear in Matt's social media in 2016 or 2017 as someone he had recently met. She appeared as someone who was already comfortable, already present, already woven into the fabric of his daily life. And when the relationship went public, when Matt and Caryn confirmed that yes, they were together, Amy Roloff said something in interviews that did not get nearly enough attention. She indicated that she had known about the relationship before the separation was finalized. She did not use the word overlap. She did not spell it out in the bluntest possible terms. But the implication was there, sitting in plain sight for anyone paying close enough attention. Matt, for his part, stood in front of cameras and said the end of his marriage had nothing to do with anyone else. He said it clearly. He said it more than once. And the audience was left to weigh his statement against Amy's, against the timeline, against the photographs, against the professional history of a woman who had been managing his farm for years before anyone called her his girlfriend. We are not going to tell you what to believe. We are going to give you the information, and we are going to trust you to be an adult who can evaluate it. Now let us talk about Amy's face, because one of the most documented aspects of this entire story did not come in the form of a statement or an interview or a social media post. It came in the form of a woman's expression, caught on camera, in real time, as she processed something that was clearly painful while a production crew stood 10 feet away filming all of it. There are episodes of Little People Big World where Amy's reaction to Caryn's growing presence on the farm, not just as an employee anymore, but as Matt's companion, as someone attending family events, as someone whose relationship with Matt's children was visibly developing, is written all over her face. Not in a dramatic, made-for-television way, not in the way a reality show producer would script it, in the quiet, involuntary way that real pain registers. The slight tension around the eyes, the pause before she answers a question, the careful, deliberate way she chooses her words when Caryn's name comes up, in a manner that tells you she has thought very carefully about how much she is willing to say on camera. What those moments showed was not a woman who was coping badly or behaving inappropriately. What they showed was a woman who was being asked to professionally process a personal betrayal, and to do it while being filmed, while knowing millions of people would watch her do it, while having no control over how the editors would frame her reaction. That is an extraordinarily difficult position to be in, and Amy handled it with more restraint than most people would have. We are not telling you this to make you angry at Matt or at Caryn. We are telling you this because those moments represent something real about what it looks like when the personal and the professional and the public all collide simultaneously. And when one person in that collision gets to define the narrative, while another person has to react to it in front of an audience. Now let us talk about the professional arc. Because Caryn Chandler's story is not just a romantic one. It is an economic and structural one. She started as the operations manager of Roloff Farms, a job that required real skills, real knowledge of how the farm functioned, real relationships with vendors and seasonal workers, and the logistical infrastructure of a business that was doing significant volume through its pumpkin season events and public access programming. She was good at her job. That is not in dispute. The farm ran, the events happened, the business functioned. She was part of why. But then the nature of her relationship with Matt changed. And with that change came a shift in what she represented to the farm. She was no longer just someone on payroll. She became someone who was functionally operating as a co-partner in the business, present at events, visible on social media promoting farm activities, involved in decisions about how the property was used and presented to the public. That transition, from employee to girlfriend to something that looked very much like a co-owner in terms of day-to-day presence, happened gradually, and it happened publicly, and it raised a question that the show never addressed directly, but that the audience kept asking. If Caryn was now part of the farm's operational future, what did that mean for Matt's children, particularly his sons, who had expressed genuine interest in taking over the property? This brings us to what is arguably the most consequential chapter in this entire story, the farm sale. Or more accurately, the farm is non-sale. The decision Matt made, and it was his decision, the farm was legally his following the divorce settlement, not to offer his sons Zach and Jeremy the opportunity to purchase the property at a price that reflected their family history with it. Matt listed it publicly. He said he would entertain offers. His sons made offers. He rejected them. He said the numbers did not work. He said business was business. And the audience, already uneasy about the Caryn situation, connected the dots in the way audiences do when they feel like they are not being told the full story. Because here's the question that nobody on that show answered directly. If Matt had sold the farm to his sons at a family-adjusted price, what would have happened to Caryn's role in it? Her operational presence on the farm was tied to her relationship with Matt. If the farm had passed to Zach and Jeremy, would she have remained part of its future? The answer is almost certainly no. And while we are not saying that Caryn was the reason Matt declined to sell to his sons, we genuinely do not know that, and it would not be fair to state it as fact. We are saying that the audience's suspicion did not emerge from nowhere. It emerged from a pattern of decisions that, when laid out sequentially, told a story that made a certain kind of sense. Zach Roloff relocated to Washington State. Jeremy Roloff stepped back from the show and has maintained a significant distance from the farm narrative. Their relationships with Caryn have been, at best, politely neutral on camera. Off camera, based on what has been documented through social media and interviews, the picture is more complicated. Jacob Roloff has been the most direct of Matt's children in expressing his perspective on the family's dynamics. Jacob left the show years ago and has spoken openly about his discomfort with the way the family's lives were commodified for entertainment. His relationship with Caryn has never been presented as warm, and his broader critique of the show and of his family's choices suggests someone who is not interested in performing reconciliation for an audience. Jeremy appeared more publicly accepting of Caryn in earlier years, but Jeremy has also pulled back significantly from the LPBW world in general, building a separate public identity that is consciously distinct from the show's legacy. The sibling responses to Caryn are not just reactions to her as a person, they are reactions to what she represents: the restructuring of a family, the rewriting of a history, the arrival of someone new in a space that used to belong to all of them equally. When children of any age process a parent's new relationship, they are not just processing the relationship, they are processing what the relationship says about everything that came before it. Now let us talk about the proposal, because this is where the story takes a turn that Matt made public himself. And because he made it public, it is absolutely fair to examine. Matt proposed to Caryn. He announced it. It was discussed on social media and in the press. And then, without a clear public explanation, the engagement appeared to pause. They were no longer described as engaged. The wedding that had seemed to be in the planning stages became an undefined future possibility. And then they continued their relationship together, without the engagement label, without the formal legal commitment, in an arrangement that has never been fully explained to the people Matt himself invited to watch. In any other context, this would be entirely private. People get engaged and unengaged and re-engaged, and none of it is anyone else's business. But Matt Roloff has built a career on inviting the public into his personal life. He has shared this relationship from the beginning: the early social media posts, the family gatherings, the on-camera introductions. He opened this chapter of his life to public consumption. That invitation does not expire when the details become inconvenient. If you are going to share the proposal, you have a different obligation to your audience when the engagement quietly goes away. We are not saying Matt owes anyone an explanation. We are saying the inconsistency between his willingness to perform intimacy publicly when it suits him and his retreat into privacy when it does not is something the audience has noticed, and noticed loudly. Now, here is something that does not get discussed enough in the context of this story. Caryn Chandler is not a passive figure. She is not simply a character in Matt's narrative. She has her own social media presence, her own following, her own voice, and her own carefully constructed public identity. Her content shows a woman who is comfortable on camera, who has opinions about the farm and about her life, who engages with her audience with confidence and wit. She posts about the property, about events, about her relationships with people in her orbit. She is not hiding. And that raises an interesting question that the show never really explored. Caryn's story, the woman who built a career managing someone else's legacy, who then became romantically involved with her employer, who then found herself at the center of one of reality television's most talked about family dramas, who built her own audience out of that visibility, is actually a more compelling story than the show ever gave her credit for. She did not ask for the level of scrutiny the LPBW fandom directed at her. She did not write herself into this narrative, but she has navigated it publicly with a degree of composure that deserves more acknowledgement than it typically gets. There is a version of a documentary or a series, or even just an extended interview, in which Caryn Chandler tells her own story in her own words. The professional history, the relationship history, the experience of being cast as the villain in a family drama she did not create. And that version would be genuinely fascinating. Because right now, what we have is her story as filtered through Matt's narrative, the show's editing choices, and the fandom's projections. What we do not have is her unmediated perspective, and that absence is telling. Here is where we want to slow down and say something that might be uncomfortable for some of you. Caryn Chandler did not break up the Roloff marriage. Marriages do not end because of third parties. Marriages end because of what is happening inside them, because of disconnection and resentment, and the slow erosion of whatever made two people choose each other in the first place. The Roloff marriage had been showing its fractures on camera for years before Caryn's name entered the conversation. Whatever happened between Matt and Amy would have happened with or without Caryn Chandler, but she became the symbol of everything that changed. She became the face of the new normal, the person who was present when the old normal ended. And the fandom, which had spent years invested in the Roloff marriage, needed somewhere to put its grief and its anger and its sense of betrayal. Caryn was the visible target. She was the person who was there, who was present, who was photographed and filmed in the spaces where Amy used to be. And that is a genuinely unfair position to be in. Not because everything Caryn did was above reproach, not because the timeline does not raise real questions, but because the structural decisions, the ones about the farm, about the divorce, about how the family's public narrative was managed, were not Caryn's decisions to make. They were Matt's. And yet Caryn absorbed a disproportionate share of the audience's anger for a situation that was ultimately shaped by choices Matt made. Ask yourself honestly, is the fandom more comfortable being angry at Caryn than at Matt? Is it easier to direct frustration at the woman who arrived than at the man who made the choices? That dynamic, where women are blamed for the decisions men make, is older than reality television, and it is worth naming. So, where does this story stand right now? Matt and Caryn are together. They are running the farm. They are present at events. They post on social media. They have a life. The sons are living their lives in different states. Zach in Washington, Jeremy building his own separate platform, Jacob maintaining his intentional distance from all of it. Amy Roloff remarried. She married Chris Merrick, and by her own account, she is genuinely happy. She has moved into a new home, built a new chapter, and she speaks about her current life with a warmth and ease that suggests she has done the work of actually moving on, not just performing it. The farm did not go to the sons. The engagement happened and then paused and then continued without a clear resolution. The show kept filming through all of it because the show keeps filming through everything, because the business model of Little People Big World has always been that the more complicated and painful real life becomes, the more material there is for television. And nobody involved, not Matt, not Caryn, not the kids, not Amy, has publicly called this new configuration comfortable. They have called it real. They have called it their life. But comfortable? That word does not appear in how any of them describe it. That is actually, in its own way, the most honest thing about this entire story. Because real life does not resolve the way television wants it to. Real life does not give you a final episode where the music swells and the family gathers and everyone agrees on the same version of events. Real life gives you a new normal that was not anyone's first choice, that carries the marks of every decision that led to it, that everyone in it is navigating as best they can. Caryn Chandler went from farm employee to the most discussed and debated figure in a show she did not choose to headline. She has been called a homewrecker and an opportunist and a villain by people who have never met her and whose understanding of her comes entirely from a television show whose editing choices are driven by ratings, not truth. She has also been defended by people who point out that a woman building a life with a man she loves is not a crime, regardless of how messy the preceding circumstances were. The reality, as it almost always is somewhere more complicated than either version. The timeline raises questions. The farm situation raises questions. The way the family fractured raises questions. And Caryn Chandler sits at the center of all of those questions, not because she engineered it that way, but because life and television and the choices of the people around her put her there. The question we want to leave you with today is not whether you like Caryn or dislike her. It is not whether you are Team Amy or Team Matt or Team anyone. The question is whether the story you have been telling yourself about this family, the clean story, the one the show encouraged you to believe, holds up when you lay the actual timeline next to it. Because we think when you do that honestly, what you find is not a villain and a victim. What you find is a set of human decisions, made under pressure, made on camera, made in ways that affected real people who are still living with the consequences. Caryn Chandler did not ask for your opinion. She has never asked for your opinion. She is going to keep living her life whether or not you approve of it. The question is what it says about the way we watch this show, and shows like it, that we have invested so much emotional energy in a woman's guilt or innocence, when the person who actually made the structural decisions that shaped this family's future has largely escaped the same scrutiny. Comment below, do you think Caryn is the villain the fandom built her into? Or is she a woman who got caught inside someone else's story and has been paying for it ever since? We read every comment. We take them seriously. And if this kind of honest, timeline-based, no-spin breakdown of the LPBW world is what you want more of, subscribe to LPBW Update right now, hit the notification bell, and stay with us. Because this series is just getting started, and the next chapter is going to be even more complicated than this one.